Hello and welcome to Timeless with Julie Hartman Live. It is Monday, December 16th, 2024. I'm Julie Hartman, and it is great, as always, to be with you. 844-861-5537 is the call-in number, 844-861-5537. And as always, you can use the live chat, which Sean and I will be monitoring throughout the episode. Speaking of Sean, who I'm now going to call Father Sean because of his admission in the latest Dennis and Julie that he has considered becoming a priest before. Hey, Father Sean, welcome on the air.
Bless you, my child.
I think you'd be an excellent priest. You're very wise. You're very approachable. And it was very interesting to hear that. And for those of you who haven't seen the episode, it did quite well. Please do check it out. Obviously, in lieu of Dennis's absence, we have been having Sean substitute. He's the new Dennis of Dennis and Julie. And speaking of Dennis, I went to the hospital this past weekend, as I do often, to spend some time with Dennis. And he was in such great spirits, I'm very happy to report. And one of the greatest reasons that he was in such good spirits is because Charlie Kirk, my colleague here at Salem, very graciously flew in to visit Dennis. And it was so sweet. We were there in the hospital room, and Charlie decided to read some of his favorite excerpts from the Book of Numbers, which is, of course, Dennis's latest iteration in his Rational Bible commentary. And it was so encouraging for Dennis to see someone, especially a man like Charlie Kirk, who was giving his impressions of the book. And I'll tell you also a funny story, or a fun story, in the wake of what has really been a tragic story over the past 5 weeks with Dennis's accident. Sue Prager, Dennis's spectacular, heroic, and stoic wife, was washing her face the other day in the morning. It was about 8:15 in the morning. Sean, you don't even know this story. I'm very excited to relay it to you and to all of you who are listening. She's washing her face, and she looks at her phone, and she sees an unknown number pop up. And usually, like the rest of us, she doesn't answer unknown numbers. But something told her to answer this, because she had been speaking with some doctors around the country, and she thought maybe it would be one of those individuals. And she answers the phone. And she told me that the person on the other end said, "Hi, is this Sue?" And Sue said, "Yes." And the person goes, "Hi, Sue, this is Donald Trump." And Sue said that she kind of froze for a moment and took a pause because, you know, she couldn't figure out if this was a robocall, if this was one of the, like, you know, where I'm asking for a donation, although I suppose that there wouldn't be cause for that anymore, given that he has won the election and he's not campaigning anymore. But obviously anybody who would hear that on the other end would have some cause for doubt. And so she freezes and she turns kind of silent. And then Donald fills the silence and says, "No, really, it's me. It's Donald Trump. This isn't a fake call." And apparently he couldn't have been more gracious. He said, "We're so sorry to hear about what happened to Dennis. He is so special to us. We need him to come back. We need his voice." And they talked for about 4 to 5 minutes about our dear Dennis's condition. And then apparently Trump ended the phone call by saying, "Well, Sue, now you have my private cell phone number. So should you need anything, you're most welcome to text or call me." Can you believe that? It's pretty damn cool to have Donald Trump's private cell phone number. I would just send him memes or daily texts asking how he's doing, but I thought that you would get a kick out of that story. Now, pivoting to something incredibly tragic, we got news this morning that there was yet another school shooting. This morning, 2 were killed and 7 were wounded. That's the number, at least so far, at the Abundant Life Christian School in Madison, Wisconsin. The Madison Police Department initially reported that 5 people were killed as a result of the shooting, but then they later said that that information was erroneous. Here's the earlier clip. It's clip 5 of the police department originally making that announcement.
Today, around 10:57 a.m., our officers were responding to a call of an active shooter at the Abundant Life Christian School here in Madison. When officers arrived, they found multiple victims suffering from gunshot wounds. We train on this almost quarterly. The last time we trained on this as commanders was approximately 2 weeks ago. The protocols are simple. Stop the killing, stop the dying, find out who's doing this. And the officers did that, and they did that adamantly. We had officers from around the county and around the state that came in support of this particular incident. Officers located a juvenile who they believe was responsible for this deceased in the building. Additionally, the officers began administering life-saving efforts to anyone who was wounded and making sure that those persons were transported. What we know is that a total of about 7 persons were transported from the scene to area hospitals for treatment. We know that at least 3 people have lost their lives, including a juvenile person.
Now, the Madison police chief also said that they believe that the shooter was a student at the school. They have not yet identified the shooter, but it does appear that there has been an increase recently in school shootings occurring at Christian schools. We remember, of course, about a year ago or earlier this year, that terrible school shooting at a Christian school in Tennessee. The manifesto of the shooter has not fully been released, or perhaps it had, but it took, as we recall, several months. But also, the thing that is so common, at least that I observe with these shootings, is that so often it is younger males. It has not yet been confirmed that this individual is a male, though we do know that this person is a juvenile. I would predict that this person is a male. And some people have said, well, we should heavily restrict gun sales to people who are in that demographic, young males. And you know what? I don't think that's a terrible option. I don't think that's a terrible proposal. In fact, I think it makes a lot of sense. That being said, we know from the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO just about 2 weeks ago that we now live in a day and age where people can make their own weapons so easily. People can also get them from their parents. We saw that with another school shooting fairly recently, that the individual got the gun from his father. People can make them at home with 3D printers. People can 3D print a gun. People can order parts on Amazon and assemble a gun. So really the problem is not so much, in my view, legislation, because as we've seen over the past 50 years, as legislation making it more restrictive to have guns has gone up, shootings have gone up. So clearly the legislation has not been effective. I think the more pertinent thing here is addressing mental health and addressing a epidemic of young men who are enthralled with violence. I'm not a young man. I know that comes as a shock. I don't know what they're doing all day. Video games, watching violent stuff on YouTube. I have no idea. Many of them are seemingly very disaffected and feel alienated by society. But it really is an important thing that we're not focusing on, that these shootings are so predictably part of a specific demographic. I mean, even look at Thomas Matthew Crooks, the 20-year-old who tried to assassinate Donald Trump. He fit the mold of the exact type of person who we would expect. And so whenever these shootings happen, I find that both sides go to their narratives and they go to their sticking points. The left calls for a ban on assault weapons or more legislation pertaining to guns. The right, I think, often tends to be more outraged when it happens at a Christian school than when it happens at other schools. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. But few people talk about that this demographic is so incredibly predictable. So I'm not sure what the solution is, but I think whatever it is, it needs to be more tailored to the fact that time and time again, we are seeing this pattern. Now, moving on to another story, which really blew up the internet this past weekend. Those who were alive in 2006, and I was alive in 2006, but I was only 6 years old, many undoubtedly remember the case that shook the nation concerning 3 Duke lacrosse players who were accused of gang raping a stripper, or as NBC News referred to her, an exotic dancer. I thought that was so funny that these news sites, in their effort to be very demure and very polite, would not refer to a stripper as a stripper, but rather as an exotic dancer. Crystal Magnum, who is, as NBC says, the exotic dancer who in 2006 accused 3 Duke lacrosse players of gang raping her, admitted on a podcast this past weekend that she lied. Now, people suspected that she lied. I was listening to Megyn Kelly, who, as a young Fox News reporter, was assigned to this case, and she said that there were shaky parts of this individual's testimony, namely that when police gave her pictures of the Duke lacrosse team, she was unable to identify the individuals, and then Megyn Kelly said under pressure, she identified the captain and 2 others. But she finally, nearly 20 years later, admitted that she just made it up. Now, the background is that she and another exotic dancer were hired to perform at a Duke lacrosse party back in 2006, March of that year. And she afterwards came up with the story. And she now, my gosh, is serving a 14-year prison sentence for second-degree murder. In 2011, she stabbed her boyfriend to death. And she is now in prison for that. And let's listen to her admitting on this podcast that the whole thing was fabricated.
I testified falsely against them by saying that they raped me when they didn't. And that was wrong. And I betrayed the trust of a lot of other people who believed in me. And made up a story that wasn't true because I wanted validation from people and not from God. And that was wrong when God already loved me for who I was. Regardless, I didn't need to seek validation from him because I already had validation from him. I just didn't know it. And I hurt my brothers. And I hope that they can forgive me, and I want them to know that I love them and they didn't deserve that, and I hope they can forgive me, and that I hope that they can heal and trust God and know that God loves them, and that God is loving them through me, letting them know that they're valuable and that they didn't deserve that.
Wow. Someone in the chat is asking, so she was never raped or she accused the wrong person? We don't know, but I think it's the former, that she was not raped. Well, and the latter. And she accused the wrong person in turn because she was not raped. Sean, you wanted to cut in?
Well, you're not alone in this. I think a lot of people have been calling her Crystal Magnum, which sounds like a stripper name. But if you look carefully, her name is Mangum, not Magnum.
Magnum is her name.
No, Mangum. Mangum.
I don't think that's what NBC News has her as. But anyway, go on.
That was it.
Oh, well, thank you for that. Very important. Very important. The listing of a G or an N. So NBC says, quote, charges against the players were eventually dropped, but it later emerged that Durham County District Attorney had withheld evidence from defense lawyers that could have cleared the men much earlier. That prosecutor was disbarred in 2007. Now, Megyn Kelly was saying, and Sean, I'd be curious if you remember this because you were not 6 years old when this happened. You were what? 26 years old or something in that ballpark. But Megyn Kelly was saying that this was one of the first kind of woke cases that really caught fire because the optics of it are so characteristically political. We have a black woman who is a stripper going to a fancy school's lacrosse party with white men, and sexual assault allegations are flying, and we can, nowadays we can understand the kind of reaction that would get. And Megyn Kelly said that it was very impressionable to her as a young reporter to see so many people disregard evidence in the name of what they thought they should believe about this case for political reasons. I want to go back to something that she said, Crystal Magnum or Magum, whatever her name is. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but different sources have the spelling differently. She said something that I actually thought was quite insightful in there. And it was very fascinating to me that she was repeatedly referring to God, that she's having this mea culpa moment, it seems, because of a newfound faith in God. It reminds me a bit of Black China, or as she is now known, Angela White. It's actually her real name, Angela White, and she decided to take on the public name Black China. I don't even know how I would describe Black China's profession. Influencer / stripper / I don't even know what, seriously, what she did. But she's most famous for having a child with Rob Kardashian, Dream Kardashian. And then that whole, I looked over at Sean, he goes, oh, yes, that is what makes people most famous, is inbreeding with the Kardashians. But she had a child with Rob Kardashian, and then she was in that whole case about revenge porn because Rob apparently posted these photos of her after she cheated on him, where she was naked. I mean, the whole thing was just so tawdry. And she has this reality TV show featuring her mother, Tokyo Toni, who is this ratchet beyond belief woman, and they're on camera fighting each other. And Black China had all these, prosthetic implants in her boobs and her butt, and she had Botox and piercings, and she would wear these outrageously promiscuous outfits. Anyway, she had this whole conversion to Catholicism. And she, God bless her, is getting rid of her prosthetics. She's going back to her birth name and not her stage name. And she has done a lot of interviews, and they are really amazing. I encourage you to check them out, where she has said, I just realized that I was better than this, that my life amounted to more, that I didn't want to continue living in this, she also became sober, this drugs, alcohol, sex, fighting, warring world. I wanted to elevate myself. And so here we see that this exotic dancer seems to have had a similar kind of awakening facilitated by a belief in God. And in that video, she said something that I want to dive into more. She said, quote, I made up a story that wasn't true because I wanted validation from people and not from God. And that was wrong, when God already loved me for who I was. I think that is a slam dunk admission. And when I look around at many individuals who are partaking in woke left-wing causes, going and marching for the abolition of police or for the abolition of prisons or marching for trans rights and, all this stuff that we're seeing, that really is what it is, what this individual is saying. It is seeking validation from people. It's wanting to participate in something that is greater than yourself and to get attention. And I think this woman, she just said it, she wanted attention, she wanted validation. And a lot of people now see this political stuff as such ripe, fertile soil to grow attention and validation. And it really does grant a lot of people validation. I mean, your claim to fame in a lot of cases is the identity group that you fit into. If you're Black, if you're gay, if you're an immigrant, if you're this or that. I remember being at my college graduation and looking around, and everyone had those, by the way, what do you even call them? I've been trying so hard to figure out what the names are, but those kind of cloths that you put around your neck. And people on those cloths would have the clubs or the affinity groups that they fit into. The Black students had the Black Student Association logo printed on it. The LGBTQ individuals had that printed on it. The Asian Americans had AAPI, printed on their cloths. I remember looking around and thinking, this is like a mock trial for the United Nations. Like, you just look at someone and they're quite literally wearing the uniform of their affinity group. Yes, Sean.
Stoles.
Stoles.
They're called stoles.
Oh, I didn't know that. The more you know. Well, thank you. I've been looking for the term for that. But people are grasping at these political narratives and identities in order to get a kind of meaning. Now, of course, doing that is very different than falsely accusing someone of rape. I'm, certainly not trying to say that those things are morally equal, but the seed here of wanting validation, I think, is so important. And you know what? Despite the evil that that person has done, kudos to her for admitting it. Finally. And kudos to her for actually doing a kind of reconnaissance and figuring out what it really was that she was trying to do. Someone's laughing at me for calling Tokyo Tony Ratchet. They say I'm adorable for calling her Ratchet. Well, thank you. I mean, it's literally the proper term.
You said, and she said she was seeking validation, and she received that from the DA in North Carolina, Mike Nifong, who was running for re-election.
Yeah.
He jumped all over this.
Yeah.
And really made an ass of himself.
Totally. I mean, that's what Megyn Kelly said. Megyn Kelly said that it was this white DA who was up for re-election that year, and he essentially was trying to show his support to the Black community and to the underprivileged community by pandering and positioning himself as, even though I'm white, I'm going to go after these 3 privileged white guys, when the evidence was not substantiating that they had in fact done that. But boy, again, I really think this is a slam dunk. When I see people who are marching for these causes and who are grasping at political things, it really just rings of their wanting this kind of validation. So, very insightful comment from this individual. All right, before we go on to our, what is this, 7th installment or maybe 6th installment of our December Gospels series, let's do a little discussion about MyPillow. Now, Sean McConnell was supposed to email me the pillow read, and he did not do that. So you know what I think? Oh, really? No, he didn't, my dear. He did not bring it in. I don't see it. No, don't bring it in. Sean, you do it. People loved when you did it. It's too late. He's coming in. Do. Hi, Zach. Do you want to come and wave? You're waving with the paper. God, Sean, I know that you are so sad that you weren't able to do this read.
Yeah.
Do you want to do it?
No. I have a MyPillow. I had the My Slippers till the dogs took them. I also forgot to tell you I have the My Towels. Excellent towels.
And on that note, you can have the My Slippers, My Towels, and My Pillows if you use the promo code Hartman. Yes, right now, MyPillow is having a Christmas extravaganza. You can get this season's flannel sheets for as low as $59.98, and they won't last long, so get them while you can. And as Sean mentioned, they have their famous My Slippers. These haven't been on sale for over a year. They're regularly priced at $119.98, but for a limited time, they're now only $59.98. I love these My Slippers. They're so comfortable. I wear them to the grocery store. I wear them to work. They are so great. You really should get them. You can also get MyPillow 6-piece towel sets for only $29.98. They're flannel sheets for as low, as I had mentioned, as $59.98, and they're 6-piece towel sets for just $29.98. But that's not all. They're extending their 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st, 2025. Plus, all orders over $75 receive free shipping. Go to MyPillow.com or call 1-800-566-6745 and be sure to use the promo code Hartman to save on all MyPillow products. That's the promo code Hartman, Hartman. You know, before we move on, I really am curious. Sean, do you remember this 2006 case?
Yep, I remember it.
What did you think of it at the time, and what was the kind of national consensus? Because I can only imagine if it had taken place in 2020 or after, whew, it would be like a George Floyd part 2.
It was a big deal, and a lot of people ran with it like they do with most stories until the facts come out. And I think I don't have much to say about it. I remember it. And,
fair enough.
And I think it's actually a good thing that she's able to have this confession, and
of course
she's trying to get her life put together. And that's probably the most important takeaway from all of this.
Of course.
I do remember the
God.
DA being a jerk and getting what he deserved. I don't think, I think they referred to a hoax like that being referred to now as a knifong because he was so adamant and so wrong. And that was the biggest takeaway from the whole thing. Also, it's easy to accuse. It's easy to accuse people of rape, and the accusation travels around the world before the truth gets its pants on.
Well, yes, and it's very sad that that allegations get so much attention, and then when something like this happens and it's disproven, it's like, oh, whatever. That was that. There should be the same energy given towards a confession like this as there is to the accusation. Okay, moving on, we're going to be talking about 2 more gospel stories, again, to increase our biblical literacy and to glean some timeless wisdom from Sean's laughing. You know how often I avoid that word on the air? I don't want to be one of those people who repeats the name of their show 50,000 times, although it would be very easy to, because the whole point of the show is to apply eternal wisdom to the modern day. And the best way to do that is from knowing the Bible, which has, in the short time that I have taken it seriously, has improved and elevated my life in countless ways. 2 stories. The first one is a little bit of a difficult one. I was actually on the phone with a priest before this. You know me. I just have priests on speed dial. And he said, this is kind of a hard story, or I don't know if I would have chosen this story as the one to identify, and you're highlighting some gospel stories. And I said to him, well, if it's difficult to understand, then it actually really should be the one that I'm highlighting. And this first one is when Jesus casts out a demon from a Gentile's child. Now, I remember, and I feel like every time I talk about these gospel series, I discuss my time in Rome, but you can see that it's made such an impression on me. I remember when I was in Rome and I was kind of getting up to speed with my Christianity and leaving the door open for faith and for learning. I was at dinner one night with some Catholics, and they were talking about demon possession. And I remember I was truly terrified. And I was kind of blown away because as a secular person who grew up in Los Angeles, went to liberal schools, didn't really have religion as part of her life, hearing these people with total seriousness talk about demon possession was so anathema to me. And I thought it was crazy. And I'm not here to give a endorsement or well, I certainly wouldn't be endorsing demon possession, but I'm not going to talk about the idea of demon possession. The validity is what I meant to say, the existence of demon possession. But nevertheless, it was such a moment for me, and I was so scared. And I remember thinking that if I opened the door to the good parts of faith, that made me afraid, because then I was opening the door to the harsh realities. And I remember kind of having a moment sitting there going, maybe I shouldn't even partake in any of this in the first place. In other words, maybe I should just kind of have this distance where I don't explore and I don't try to seek out these spiritual truths, because they're terrifying. But then I realized, no, this is a part of life, whether you literally believe in it or you believe in it sort of as a parable or allegory for evil overtaking a person. This is a part of spiritual warfare. And if you want the good parts, you have to understand the bad parts. So we're looking here at the book of Mark. And the thing too that I realized as I was coming up to speed in my biblical literacy is that a lot of these stories are really short. This one is literally 6 lines. I don't know about you, but I always thought of the Bible as this long book. These are very short and very concise stories. So here's the gist. And let's put up a photo. Picture 1. This is an unknown artist from the 15th century. It really is stunning, the beautiful colors that are employed here. So Jesus goes and meets a Greek woman. And what's important about this is this woman is not a Jew. And we have seen through our even short discussion so far on Timeless of the Gospels that there are many stories with Jesus, with the woman at the well, the Good Samaritan, having these encounters with people who are not Jews. And that is, of course, on purpose in order to show that Jesus's love and his universal message extends to everyone and not just the Jews. So he's meeting with this Greek woman born in Syrian Phoenicia, as the book of Mark says. And she is begging Jesus to drive a demon out of her child. Again, whether you literally believe that the devil inhabited the child, or it's a parable for evil and impurity, I'll leave that to your spiritual discretion. But the story is that there is an impure spirit inhabiting this child, and the Gentile woman is asking Jesus for his help. And this is a curious little exchange that Jesus and the woman have. And again, when I was on the phone with the priest about this, I was pressing him, what does this mean? And we finally figured it out. And it's one of the more difficult ones to understand. Jesus says to her, "First, let the children eat all they want, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." And I'm reading that going, what the heck does this have to do with demon possession? What is Jesus saying about food and dogs eating food? I mean, the whole thing, it almost seems absurd and nonsensical. So he says it's not right to take children's bread and toss it to the dogs. And then the Gentile woman responds, "Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And then Jesus says, "For such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter." And so I've done some reading online, and people are writing like, the Bible is crazy. This is nonsensical. This is proof that the Gospels are nuts and this makes no sense. And even though it may be difficult, this impels me to want to understand. And essentially what this is this is number one, a parable. And number two, it is a test of faith. Jesus is not literally referring to like rough dogs. Gentiles back in that day were known as dogs. And essentially what Jesus is doing is he is testing this woman's faith. And so when the woman goes to him and says, "Jesus, please help me cast this demon out of my child," he replies, "Let the children eat all they want, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." In other words, he is saying a statement that actually is not in accordance with what he believes, but he is testing this woman's faith and this woman's allegiance to him. In other words, he's saying, let not bread, our spiritual wisdom and spiritual teaching, it is not right to toss that to the dogs. It is not right to give that to Gentiles. Back in the day, it would be understood as when Jesus is referring to dogs, he's referring to Gentiles. So he's essentially saying Gentiles are not in the reach of, it is not right to give spiritual wisdom to the Gentiles. And then the woman, a Gentile herself, comes back and says, "Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." In other words, even the dogs, the Gentiles, want this spiritual wisdom. And then that's when Jesus says, "For such a reply you may go. The demon has been cast out of your child." So this is a test of the woman's faith, where he's essentially repeating the narrative that Gentiles are not brought into the kingdom of the Messiah. And she's saying, "But I believe. Even dogs eat the bread." And then he's saying, "Okay, good, you passed the test." One can understand how this is a bit of a curious story. Why would Jesus say something that is against what he believes? But again, this is a test. And if you believe in Jesus and if you believe in the God of the Bible, you know that Jesus being God knows that this is an opportunity or a test that wouldn't lead her astray. That this is an opportunity for her to prove something of her faith. And in testing her, he is giving her an ability to assent to God. And he is testing her persistence and her faith. And the fact that she would even contradict Jesus saying that the bread is not tossed to the dogs, the fact that she would even say, "No, it is. The dogs want to eat the bread," it's allowing her to show her faith and to exercise the virtue of persistence. But again, the important part here is God is not going to give you tests that he knows is going to lead you astray. He's going to give you tests knowing that it is an opportunity to prove something of yourself. That is the common wisdom, at least, that is associated with this story. Sean, do you have I've been watching you going, oh, and looking.
Well, I was perplexed until you explained that it was a test, because God tasked the Jews with bringing the gospel to the world.
Right.
Is that not,
it's a test.
This woman was a Jew?
No, a Gentile.
A Gentile. Okay. So it would seem to me that in order to bring the gospel to the world, you would have to give the crumbs to the dogs.
Right.
The Gentiles. Okay. All right. I'm with you. This is good clarity. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you're with me. But again, it's that she was even saying, no, the dogs eat the bread from under the table. She's saying, I am a Gentile, I'm not a Jew, and nevertheless I believe in you. Guess that rhymes. And so it's showing that the extent of the belief in Christ wasn't just confined to Jews. And in turn, when she demonstrates her faith, that is when Jesus heals her child. And in that sense, I think it also shows two more things. First, that Jesus is a spiritual healer. He's not just a physical healer. You know, we talked about the story of Lazarus being raised from the dead. We talked about the healing of the lame or the blind man. He's not just a physical healer, but a divine spiritual physician. And also, it speaks to something that we've been talking about a lot, and something that has kind of fascinated me, this idea of intercessory prayer. That you can appeal to God, and God may test you, but God may also interact with your free will to bring about an outcome that you want. Here we see a woman is petitioning God, and they have an exchange, and then Jesus ends up granting her what she wishes. Just as Abraham in the book of Genesis bargains God down before he destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. God originally was going to destroy it if there were not 50 righteous people, and then Abraham bargains him down to 10. We see these exchanges, even Jacob wrestling with God, where people are not just blindly deferential to the will of God, or that God doesn't just kind of wave a magic wand and assert his will. There are all these stories of people interacting with him. And I think that gives us reason to think that he wants to interact with us. And one of the ways we can do that is to petition him through prayer and ask for clarity or ask for things in the hopes that he will grant them. And he may not always grant them. But again, time and time again, we do see that he wants to interact with us. So that's the first story I wanted to talk about. And now with that kind of spiritual heavy lifting over with, this next story is a lot more widely known, and I have such a great story for you about this story. But before we do that, I do want to, just kidding, I was going to show you another picture. I thought there were two for this first one. There are two for this second one. The second one is Palm Sunday. It's when Jesus is riding on the donkey into Jerusalem. Let's show a German painting from the 15th century, picture 2. It's actually a relief, forgive me, and not a painting, but we see Jesus there on the donkey. And it's a really simple story. People are coming into Jerusalem from all over for Passover, and they've heard about this guy Jesus and his miracles. This is shortly after, for instance, the raising of Lazarus from the dead. And so people from all over, Gentiles and Jews alike, decided to take palms and wave them at Jesus entering into Jerusalem to go to the temple. And people are really demonstrating their belief in God. And this is also a story that kind of lays the groundwork for Jesus's arrest, trial, and crucifixion, because the Roman authorities were catching on to the fact that many people were believing him to be the King of the Jews and the Messiah. And the Roman authority was like, who's this guy who is supplanting our authority and who's capturing the attention of all of these civilians? So Jesus is coming into Jerusalem. People are waving these palms. They're saying, "Blessed is he, the King who's coming in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven, glory in the highest." Jesus goes to the temple, and people are saying, "Who is this?" And the multitude are answering, "This is Jesus, the prophet of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." And the cool part about this story is a kind of spiritual wisdom that a priest, another priest who I have on speed dial, told me about the donkey of all characters in this. Let's look at picture 3. This is Flandrin from 1842. It's called Christ's Entry into Jerusalem. And I love this little story that this priest told me. He said, think about Palm Sunday. Think about it from the perspective of the donkey who is carrying Jesus on his back. The donkey doesn't know who he is carrying on his back. He probably thinks that it's just any old individual who he usually carries around. And he said, from the perspective of the donkey, you're walking into Jerusalem and you see all these people who are waving palms at you. And the priest said the donkey probably thought that they were waving palms at him. But little did he know that they were waving palms at Jesus, who was on his back. And the priest looked at me as he told this story and he said, see, we all have to think of ourselves as the donkey. We think we're so cool for all that we're doing in our lives, but really we owe our lives, and to the extent that we abide by spiritual wisdom, are good choices to the instruction of the guy above us. And so he looks at me and he goes, you're an ass. Amen. He is a hilarious priest, let me tell you. That's another thing people don't get. Again, I've had this whole kind of evolution because I used to be one of the people on the outside with regard to religion. And I used to think that priests were these very pious individuals. And of course, many of them are, but they're very serious and they don't laugh and they certainly don't curse and they don't tell jokes. If Sean were to become a priest, whew, would that understanding be upended? But so many priests are hilarious. And this guy was hilarious. He literally looked at me and said, you're an ass. Amen. And it's those kinds of stories that I think really contribute most to your spiritual wisdom. And so, yes, that is the story of Palm Sunday. But isn't that a great reading into it? That's why I love these stories, because it's, forgive me, but it would be kind of boring if it were just, oh, Jesus rode in on a donkey and people were waving at him. It's these great insights that allow these things to really come to life, in my humble opinion.
I can't help but be reminded that you did dress as a donkey once for Halloween, did you not?
I did. Yeah. I was, let me see if I can very quickly pull it up if Sean can distract.
Yeah.
My roommates and I in college, we dressed up as the cast of Shrek, which was my idea. And you know what? When people go for sexy Halloween costumes, I admire them. Like, if you got it, flaunt it. But I just feel like it looks a little try-hardy. I've always done these really funny Halloween costumes. Like, I was a nun one year. I've done all these crazy things. And so, yeah, I was a donkey. I can't find it. But I got on this whole, like, head-to-toe donkey suit. And the donkey hat was coming from above me. And I was Donkey from Shrek. And it was so hot. I went to a party and it was cold outside in Cambridge, but the party was inside, that I literally almost fainted. Like, I think I lost 15 pounds that night from wearing the donkey costume. And I'll end with this. People who were seeing me, not with my roommates, because, you know, we disperse at the party. Shrek, my roommate who was Shrek, was over at one end, and Puss in Boots was over there, and what's his name? Oh my God, what's the king's name? Farquaad, Lord Farquaad was somewhere else. And people thought, because I'm conservative, that I was dressing as a Democrat. They would come up to me and they'd be like, hilarious costume. You're trolling the Democrats. I'm like, no, I'm donkey. I'm not a Democrat. Okay. On that note, this has been riveting, hasn't it? Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you tomorrow, 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern. We have an amazing in-studio guest tomorrow. Amazing. He grew up in the Soviet Union. He now is a rabbi in Israel. He is so bombastic and hilarious, and he tells the most fascinating stories of realizing that all of the things that he was taught in the Soviet Union were lies. So please come tomorrow, tune in, and thanks so much for being here.